The name of this series, When the Survivors of Atlantis and Hyperborea Wake Up, was inspired by a Siberian legend, according to which the wise men of the bygone ages didn't really die, but they entered natural formations, usually stones, to hibernate, so to say, until the new golden age appears. And when the time is right, they will manifest again alive. When I decided upon the name, I really had no clue. I couldn't even imagine about how close will I get eventually involved in this process, and this is the subject of this video, along with a really epic report from Sayed, who got the amazing chance to actually visit back in time Bogumil settlement in the forest, because as I told you, he is in touch with an ancient spirit of the Bogumils. Sayed is a very trusted source of information. He is not like one of these new age seers who say that they have channeled this or that information, but in reality they cannot be trusted because they themselves, their heart is not yet pure enough, and instead of working on their personal qualities, they distract themselves in self-glorification. You see what kind of an advanced soul am I? I am even seeing things. Sayed is completely different. He is from a scientific background in physics, and he has devoted his life to meditation and self-purification. His family, they live in the wild, and also all of them, they basically live the way the Bogumils lived. Sayed saw the stone houses of the Bogumils in the forest, intertwined with the trees. They didn't disturb nature at the slightest. That's why they would not first clear a space where to build a house, but instead they constructed their dwellings around the natural features of the given spot. And those spots were not random. They could perceive where the powers of the natural elements are stronger and place their dwellings on those spots, and they would build them to follow those energies. In terms of appearance, most of them were blonde. Also, they were very, very athletic built and extremely beautiful. Both men and women had long hair, but they didn't grow beards. Their lifespan was a couple of 100 years, and we are talking about times which were 1000, and according to some sources, even 500 years ago, 600 years ago. Their dishes and cutleries were made of gold, and in their scattered forest settlements, there were always these very, very tall and spiky towers, something like the modern minaret. These were energy transmitters connected to the other centers, which were all over the world. Yes, I'm not exaggerating. The Bogumil centers were all over the earth, and you can see the other towers in one of the previous episodes. Alcohol and meat eating didn't exist in their civilization, although at the later stages, when Kali Yuga began, they did eat fish, at least some of them. Their food consisted primarily of fruits from the numerous trees in the forest, which bared all kinds of fruits, even such fruits that Sayed has never seen before. Abundant food grew in the forest, so the need of agriculture was very minimal. They cultivated only grains actually, but not there in the forest. They grew them near the river beds at the places where the waters would overflow every year and create extremely fertile patches of soil. They also had something remotely similar to a king. He would be seen together with all the other people to cultivate the grains and do all the daily chores. And the only different thing about him was that he coordinated, facilitated social matters without telling the others how to live their lives or taking any sort of payment for it. Exactly like Bigfoot and the tribes of dwarfs covered in the very early videos in this channel lived simultaneously in two planes, exactly like Bigfoot. You know, he's often seen appearing and disappearing, coming in and out of the other dimension. So were the Bogumils, and not just their initiated wise men, but all of them. And there were so many of them. In Europe alone, there were tens of millions. The official population numbers of that time are completely wrong. All this is from Sayert, all this information. Their clothing resembled the ancient robes of the Slavic people, and their music was quite different. The instruments were completely different at that time. The only instrument which we have now is the flute, and the organs which we know of, they somewhat resemble their organs. They didn't work hard in the fields since food was readily available in the forest, and in their abundant spare time, their so-called only occupation for their lives was taking care of their children exceptionally well so that they can grow up as pure spirits. And that was not duty primarily of the mother. Both parents participated equally and in general were considered equal in every respect. In their society, men and women were not, so to say, sexually polarized as people are nowadays. And also many other true sources like Seth of Jane Roberts explains that this idea that, for example, the man must be like hard and macho to be a real man, otherwise it's against nature. This is all lie. This is a demonic trick to nurture brutality and mercilessness in half of the people on earth. And Seth goes in length explaining how the ancient people were exactly as Sayert told me, not sexually polarized. Who were these people after all? The mainstream sources, of course, try to defraud us about their origin. They say, oh, they are members of a Gnostic religious sect or movement founded by the Bulgarian Pope Bogomil or Bayan the Magi, according to some other sources who became popular the last couple of decades. But as they will confess in their scientific works, somewhere towards the end, maybe with very small letters, but these are only suggestions because we don't really have any evidence that any of the two did it, because about Pope Bogomil they don't know anything at all besides the name. And as far as Bayan the Magi, yes, he was a prominent, the most prominent mystic of his time. His contemporaries described him as the most powerful Magi, like the Magis who visited Jesus who was born, the same title. He's the greatest Magi of all the empires now. That's how his contemporaries described him. And yes, he was Bogumil. He was also a prince, son of the Bulgarian king Simon, who was an advanced mystic himself. So he sent his best son to study in the most famous schools, mystic schools at that time. And just a small story of how much he was respected. King Simon, he actually defeated the Byzantine Empire while he was alive, but when he died, Bayan's brother inherited the throne because Bayan himself refused. He said, I'm not really fully into this world, this is not a job for me. So his weaker brother took the kingdom, and the Byzantine Empire then gathered its army and marched towards Bulgaria to retrieve the lost lands. But when they arrived at the battlefield, the Bulgarian army was not headed by the weaker King Peter, but by his 17-year-old brother Bayan Dimagi. And some of his tutors in magic, they were, of course, in the Byzantine army at that time, because warfare was done a lot through magic in those days. So when his teachers saw him, they said, "Oh, hello! What a nice coincidence to see you here and to meet you in person." As we were going back to Byzantine, we were camping here watching the birds, and they went back home. There is evidence that Bayan was one of the most prominent Bogumils of his time, but this in no way implies that he created the movement. Indeed, it was not a movement at all, even at the slightest, not even a religion, at least in the modern sense of the word, because the truth is that what we have now labeled as Bogumils, very mistakenly, were actually the people of Treta Yuga, the Yuga before Kali Yuga. And as we know from legends from all over the world, people back then lived a few hundred years, and so did the Bogumils. And as we know, the transition between the yugas is gradual, and as we will see later in this video, it flows differently at different places on earth. So who were the Bogumils indeed? These were the Treta Yuga people who lived in the area of the Balkans and southern Europe. Mainly in a broader sense, there were communes. This is at least the official meaning of the word Bogumils, communes all the way from Ireland to India and on the northern coast of Africa and Asia Minor. They were a group of highly advanced souls, and once they left, more or less in the beginning of the Kali Yuga, many or maybe even all of them finished their earthly education and will not reincarnate again. All this knowledge is from Sayert. Now let's get sidetracked for a moment and understand a bit more about the four yugas, because we need it to grasp the full picture. The four yugas are Satya, Dvapara, Treta, and Kali, and the earth goes through them again and again for eternity, at least from our limited point of view. The overall picture of Satya Yuga is pretty much the way now we imagine paradise. And then in the next two yugas, Dvapara and Treta, gradually people started developing materialistic traits. Private property appeared, inequality amongst people, money. The degradation, however, was rather mild in the previous to yugas, and only in Kali the society rotted from within completely. In the older yugas, the people were much bigger in terms of body size, and the yugas themselves were much longer. What you see on the screen now is the most common interpretation on how long do the yugas last in our terms, in the years, the way we understand them. But most likely this is not really the correct interpretation, because from many other reliable sources found in the previous videos, we found out that Kali Yuga is actually 1000 years in our terms. The reasons for this confusion could be some mixing of earthly years and divine years, or it could be because of the language reforms. Although the Vedas, what we have today in Sanskrit, is almost identical to what was there at the beginning of Kali Yuga some 1000 years ago, still sometimes there are minor corrections which were made when major language reforms were introduced, and at that time quite few things were scrambled and lost. And in terms of celestial and earthly years, there are stories in the Vedas when, in rare cases, earthly people could visit the higher realms. By the time they come back, they only found their grandchildren. And since we reached the topic of calendars, let's go back to the Bogumils, who, by the way, used very ancient calendar, and in the modern books about them, there are translations of their stechi, the stones, and in some cases even boulders in which their souls reside now, and which weigh up to 30 tons. Just for a comparison, the average weight of the blocks of the Great Pyramid of Giza is 2-3 tons. And that means the biggest statue is 10 times bigger than them. And not only, and over there you see things written with modern ears, but so in the modern translations of the text of the statue, we see years of our calendar, but this is just a translation. To find out these numbers, they simply subtracted 5,508 years from the actual numbers written on the statue. Since the Bogumils themselves, including the spirit who is in touch with Sayert, lived when they still had active human body for a couple of hundred years, it is normal that they have a calendar covering thousands of years. They had much wider horizons than the modern people. Lumanians were the first to start building the protective shields of the earth. Maybe the Lumanians started to decline when Dvapara or Treta Yuga started. Later on, the good Atlanteans followed in their footsteps. So, since the Lumanians eventually decided to dissolve amongst the cavemen who lived on the surface of the earth at that time, we don't have a really direct connection with them to know where were their places. From Atlantis, however, we do have direct heritage, because some of the enlightened souls of Atlantis, they survived in their body and they went to other continents and continued their mission of enlightenment. They built up centers and attempted to put back the protection shield on Earth. The central hub of the Atlantean restoration project of the defense system was in nowadays Sahara. The Great Pyramids, which are almost incomprehensible for modern people, they were nothing but peripheral minor structures built at the final stages of that culture. And while the main pivot of the protection in Sahara was responsible for the entire earthly realms, there were smaller outposts all around the world. They specialized in preserving and developing different aspects of the earthly existence of the school called Earth. After the devils devastated the central protection hub at Sahara, some 100 of the smaller centers continued their activity without interruption, and they maintained regular and very active connections with each other. It was a worldwide system for communication and, most importantly, loving cooperation based on internal purity and knowledge. And this is actually Tartaria. That was Tartaria in its peak time. And only after Kali Yuga began, the parasites they managed to break it into pieces to finish it off. And although most modern research on Tartaria explores its final days at the dawn of Kali Yuga, the Vedic literature has a much wider horizon on it because it explains that in Treta Yuga there was only one kingdom on earth, that was Tartaria proper. All this penguin talk that people back then were dull and were confined to their area or at most their continent is complete nonsense. There was a constant, very active exchange between the different places of power, and for people who could switch between dimensions and who had mystic powers, including for transportation, no seas and oceans and vast valleys were a barrier. And not just in the bygone yugas, but even now in Kali Yuga, when the Bogumils, the Catars at Mount Sigur, were besieged, four of their most advanced teachers, they simply dematerialized and took with themselves the most precious relics and symbols of the Bogumils to reappear again on the other side of Europe at a location known as Biala Voda in the Strange region of Bulgaria. Now, getting back at the remaining functioning centers, when Kali Yuga started, the decay spread rapidly in the areas with weaker protection. However, the centers themselves continued to function with smaller capacity all the way to year 1463, when the Bosnian kingdom of the Bogumils fell down. For this reason, the Bogumils in Bosnia, and Sayert is connected to a soul from Bosnia, they lived for hundreds of years and in the very relatively near historic past, while outside the protected area, the people already had a much shorter lifespan. The borders of the safe Bogumil centers were wide open for the people from the areas which already decayed. On one side, thousands of advanced Bogumils, they did not marry but devoted their life to traveling village to village and enlightening the simple people, healing them very much as well. They were famous for being healers. While on the other hand, the people from the surrounding areas were absolutely free to relocate in the Bogumil community and become one of them. If, however, a person relocates to their area but is not really clean enough to even start transforming himself, in such cases, the protection of the light was designed in such a way that nobody would do anything to him. He would leave himself because too many things over there will not make sense to him. He will feel alienated and leave on his own will. Needless to say, the church devils could not sleep well at night with all these pure hearted people roaming free like this in broad daylight. First, they sent, of course, their missionaries to cloud everybody's mind, but that didn't succeed at all. And then they started sending armies, one after another. But every time something like this would happen, when the army just approaches, all of a sudden a big wave of few meters would sweep it away, coming as if from nowhere. Yet at the other point, all of a sudden a hurricane would start and disperse the army in panic. This went on and on, probably centuries. Eventually, the advanced Bogumil souls finished the period of their earthly education. And of course, all this runs on karma. It means it was planned like this. When Kali Yuga comes, the advanced souls go away. And that is why eventually the Inquisition was allowed to harm their bodies only. Their spirits left before they were burned or strangled. In the Byzantine part of the Roman Empire, they were strangling them secretly and throwing them in the Bosphorus, while in the West they organized initially the public burnings. The Inquisition decided to burn them in most horrible and disgusting way to teach a lesson to everybody else, you see. This will be your end as well if you decide to follow the ancient knowledge and not the church. The result, however, of these public burnings at the stake was quite the opposite, because once the Catars, the Bogumils, went near the flame, many of them, groups of them together, dissolved into smoke and disappeared, or turned into birds and flew away. And the crowds which saw that, these people started wondering, who are really the heretics, those which are being burned, or those who started the fire? All of the Bogumils left their bodies before the Inquisition could torture them, not just the more enlightened. You can find more historic accounts in the book called Bogumility by Professor Damian Popchristov, who, by the way, seems to be a reincarnated Bogumil soul himself. The first part of the video about their daily life was entirely from Sayert, but in the second part about their end, that is mixed with information from Damian Popchristov, and speaking about authentic, reliable material about the Bogumils. A very important one is, of course, the book written by the Prepodobna Testoina, who had vivid memories of her past life as enlightened Bogumil. The most interesting things from that, the highlights of that book, are in one of the older videos, but basically it absolutely confirms everything Sayert said, although he himself never read the book. For the devils, it was not hard at all to find the pretext for which they would start burning the Bogumils. Oh, but they were heretics, of course, for things that they believed, like, for example, reincarnation and karma. Now, as a side note, let's see how the doctrines of reincarnation and karma transformed into heresy from standard church beliefs before that. At some point, a woman called Theodora became the empress of the Roman Empire. Although she was born in a very unrespected family, she made her way to the pyramid of power with murders and intrigues. And once she became empress, she looked even further to the skies. Why not become even a saint, like canonized official saint? But since her origin and her deeds did not look healthy at all from the perspective of karma and reincarnation, she decided to simply remove them from the approved church teachings. Now, at that time, to remove a doctrine from the church, you would need the approval of the both pillars of the church faith, Rome and Constantinople. And initially things didn't go smooth for her, because the Pope didn't think that's a good idea to remove reincarnation and announce it as from now on it is heresy. So she killed the Pope, and then another Pope was placed. And bad luck, he was also against that idea. She killed him as well. And after disposing of a couple of uncomfortable popes, she appointed her own man who declared karma and reincarnation a heresy, and she achieved her goal. The 100 places of power, the protection hubs of the earth, have lost lots of their strength due to the advances of Kali Yuga, but they are not fully deactivated. Still, some protection is left. Mostly they are situated in the old world, Siberia and Latin America. The centers were specialized, and the one which is responsible for healing on all levels will of course play a pivotal role for the unfolding golden age. And that center is a relatively big one in terms of size, and it is located in the area of the Balkans. When I heard this for the first time, I finally understood what Baba Vanga meant when she said that Russia will bring the new golden age, but Bulgaria will play a pivotal role along with all the other Slavic nations. Before, I was a bit puzzled looking at the level of consciousness of the modern Bulgarians, so far away from godly. Indeed, they are far less religious than all the other nations around us. But now I understand why, because the code of the Bogumils is very deeply embedded, as you will see. There is more material on this later in the video, is embedded in the consciousness of the Bulgarians, and they're not interested in church because the Bogumils, they didn't go to these churches. Indeed, in the authentic Bogumil writing, it is said that the church, to start with, was created to deviate the people from the path of enlightenment. So they built a church which mimicked that path. It was very similar, just with one small difference, that it led the souls towards darkness instead of light. There are some historic narratives portraying the Bogumils as member of, let's say, some they would call it Gnostic church or something similar, part of Christianity. And these are genuine, but these were from the times when best the proper Bogumils, they withdrew, they went to heaven, they will not come back. That was the end of their education. But people who were, so to say, influenced by them in between the real Bogumils and the really Kali Yuga people, there were people in the middle, they remained. And after the direct teachers, the Bogumils, were no longer there, they took refuge in the church. They kind of adapted what they have learned to the church. And getting back to the Bogumil code in the modern Bulgarians, there are people like Christunenov and the man Pop Christov who still teach the very same essence of the Bogumil teachings. Okay, there are very, very few of them, but that is to be expected anyway, since the prophecies tell us that by the time the ordeal is over, there will be one or two people per village left, and a handful in the towns and the cities. When the dark clouds of Kali Yuga descended upon the earth, the pure souls, they withdrew. They no longer lived here because pure souls live in pure realms. But they do return, some of them to continue their learning, and others just to teach. And although teachers incarnated even within Kali Yuga, for example, Christian Rosenkreuz was considered by many actually reincarnation of Bayandi Magi, because his teachings were basically those of the Bogumils, which is the eternal Dharma. They are not Bogumil teachings. Bogumil is actually a modern term. It was not used historically at all. They did not call themselves Bogumils for sure. Also, Peter Dunov definitely taught the message of the Bogumils, although he did not say become Bogumils, but the essence was the same. To some extent, Rudolf Steiner as well, although I don't fully agree with the way he presents certain things, but the things themselves are the same, the eternal Dharma. And although that was going all along Kali Yuga, the biggest return will be at the very end, at the transition. Although reincarnation is the easiest to imagine way for the souls to return, there are other ways as well. For example, in the previous episodes of this series, I showed you basically mummies who are still alive. And when these mystics, before they died, they explicitly said, I'm gonna keep my spirit anchored to my body so that I can become active again when the final battle between good and evil will take place. And in many cases, this was in quite a precise amount of years, and it always points more or less towards our time. The mummies still show some very minor signs of life, like fresh blood or perspiration. They have been also tested, and the tissues appear to be those of living people, not the dead. But that is the style of the Eastern mystics. Here in the Slavic lands, it is the same thing. Like, for example, the spirit who is in touch with Sayert, he lives within one of those steci. Officially, these are just some enormous and often quite fancy burial stones, but the text on them and what the spirit showed and told Sayert is completely different. They're nothing else but kind of an anchors, or maybe we should say mini portals, with which the Bogumil spirits, they remain in our reality, because they plan to get more actively involved when the epic moment of the transition gathers momentum. And actually, Sayert asked him, why don't you simply get reborn instead of staying attached to this stone, which is not particularly pleasant, by the way, because on the stones themselves, the inscriptions, they describe how the spirit feels in there. A typical inscription would say, I lived in this and this way, and now I'm here. It's not very comfortable, but I have decided to do so for a reason. The spirit explained to Sayert that his incarnational cycle on Earth is over. And this is exactly how things work. It's explained in the set material of Jane Roberts. The souls, they come in classes, so to say, groups, to study together. And these groups are formed in such a way that the souls in them are more or less on the same level. And exactly as in school, students, the classes, they graduate all of them together at the same time. And of course, when a Yuga ends, that is usually the graduation period for many souls. And that was the destiny of the Bogumils of the Cathars. At the moment in which the Inquisition devils pushed them towards the flames, that was the last moment of their incarnational cycle on Earth. Their souls flew away. before the devils would pour their poison on their empty bodies. Bosnia was the last standing pillar where real Bogumils lived. They had even official kingdom over there, recognized even by the devils for hundreds of years. And when millions of them graduated at the same time, some thousands, they decided to stay in the form of steci. That's why they are so massive, these stones, so that the anchor is strong. And quite often they are found at very secluded and difficult to get to places. There is no transport, so they can't drag them to the museum. In Siberia, it was very similar. There are plenty of legends that the heroes still live in different elements of nature and do plan to get up and fight again at the final battle. There is a pristine, wild area of Bulgaria called Stranja Mountain. Almost no infrastructure, maybe some 2,000 people live in the entire region. There are no people there, basically. And at some point, even the government decided to populate the region and they started giving out free houses to those who wished to go there, but nobody went. So eventually, they turned it into a nature reserve because it's full of rare and even unknown flora and fauna. But far more important are the treasures hidden in the mountain. Not just gold treasures, which, according to Vanga, are some 25,000 kilos of, I don't know, only gold or other precious things, but it was one of the major spiritual hubs in the past. Probably that's why it is not inhabited nowadays. Most likely, this is the natural protection of the place. This was the birthplace of the Egyptian goddess Bastet, and when she finally quit her body, she desired that she comes back to it, and they carried her sarcophagus by hand all the way from Egypt to Stranja, near the town of Malku Târnu. And all these treasures, they will be revealed again once the new age starts, Vanga told us. In 1981, there was an expedition in which Lyudmila Zhivkova participated, and they followed Vanga's directions to find the burial place of Bastet. And a couple of kilometers away from it is the place called Biala Voda. It is in the woods, and Vanga said that once the golden age starts, the biggest center for with healing waters on earth will be built here. And she gave instructions about a particular shrine to be built there. And indeed, when they started digging for that purpose, a spring was discovered. Water started coming out with a very peculiar color, by the way. Biala Voda means white waters. The shrine which was built didn't match the Orthodox dogma for building shrines, and there was no way it could be blessed, by the church. But in her last days, Vange insisted. She said, "You must build it." They told her they don't want to allow it. The church. She said they will. You just start building. They will. And by miracle, eventually they did allow. And the opening of the shrine was just 4 days after she left her body. And for some reason, the Inquisition decided upon exactly that spot out of all of Europe to transport and bring their Bogumils from all over Europe and Asia, and in Bulgaria in thousands. There were some 60, 70,000 of them. And all the devils were thinking only murder, of course, they can't think anything else. That was not the perspective of the Bogumils themselves. Many of them actually arrived there by themselves. Nobody forced them for the final ritual. They wanted to depart together, the entire group of souls. And not only that, they also wanted to leave behind a living heritage, something for the people to whom they were preaching and serving in their lives during the dark times and the times of transformation. And they merged together in what is described by some as cloud or sphere of energy at that place, Bialovudam, which is the collective consciousness of all these very pure Bogumils. In addition, Vanga identified 7 big trees which embody the souls of their most advanced elders. The shrine is built exactly in between them. The Bogumils were simply the people of Treta Yuga who lived in Europe and parts of Asia Minor and North Africa. They did not consider themselves a member of a religion, a sect, or any sort of religious movement. They considered themselves simply good people. That's because in the previous 3 yugas, there were no religions. There was this only the eternal dharma, they called it. This is the underlying principle, the celestial standard of what is good and what is bad, and what are the good qualities for which the entire universe was created as a learning school. And the so-called scientific garbage, which passes nowadays as all that we know about the Bogumils, is nothing else but waste of time, so that you get dissuaded to look for the truth. Because if you open their Penguinian books, it is full of isms, all kinds of isms. Like, for example, Manichaeism and Gnosticism provided the foundation for Bogumilism. Actually, Gnostics and the followers of Mani, they did follow the Dharma, that same Treta Yuga Dharma, the eternal Dharma, and that's why their philosophy is so similar. And most importantly, this philosophy is misrepresented very skillfully. Of course, there are lots of elements of truth, but when it comes to the actual way one lives one's lives in their descriptions of philosophy, the elements which will practically allow one to purify one's inner being, they are either absent on or misrepresented, twisted in such a way that will be impractical. And they fill up the heads of the readers, the scientific readers, with all kinds of isms, and the students are fed that garbage as well, so that by the time they develop as adults, they will be fully convinced that all religions were either concocted by some super smart guy, and the masses, they have no other choice but to follow, because that's what everybody does. Or the other, even more dumber choice they give is to imagine that lightning stroke a half human, half monkey, and he decided that the clouds are playing with fireworks. And that's how the idea of God emerged. And since the smart guys who concocted the religions didn't have their fantasy well developed, that's why all the religions turned out to be quite similar. And with such ridiculous fairy tales, they cover the actual Dharma, which is that from internal purity stem both pure, real knowledge and also countless opportunities to create all kinds of things with the play building blocks of the material elements of the universe. And that the only result of adharma, which is the opposite of dharma or evil, is misery and downfall, decay. Some ancient Bogumil prophecies reveal that they knew how long will Kali Yuga be, because when Tsar Simeon, King Simon, the father of Bayan the Magi, was departing, he left the following words for the future generations. He said, "If I would have crowned Bayan, he would have kept Bulgaria great for 100 years. But when I let him live the life of a mystic, he will keep it for 1000." And that was roughly 1000 years ago. And yet another one from France, from the Catars, who are also part of the Bogumil label, official label, when they were about to burn alive one of the last Bogumils, he told to the crowds that all you're doing is in vain, because in 700 years from the ashes of the Catars, a green tree will sprout again. That was actually exactly 700 years ago. And finally, a very short Bogumil prayer read by a very pure Bogumil soul.
O Bože, očisti me iznutra i izvana. Očisti mi tijelo, dušu i duh, da plamen u meni bukne, kako bih svjetlećom bakljom postala. Želim svoj sopstveni plamen postati i sve u sebi i oko sebe u svjetlost pretvoriti.